my mentality was such that we like learned 3 songs. There was a couple guys I could really pick. And the band had 3 songs. I booked a gig for a month later. And I'm like, we got to learn 6 more songs, guys. And it was always like that. It's just like make the opportunity, and then you're sort of forced to rise to the occasion. Yeah, do your best.
I call it the desired obligation.
Yes.
Which is like we talked about Patreon earlier, and I do that every month. And I started it, of course, like everybody else in 2020, because I was at home for the first time in decades for a whole season, which is on one hand, personally, kind of a melancholy thought. On the other hand, playing music, well, that's what I've been doing. And going out of town. So I started that, and that obligation to have a song every month and a podcast every month, and it makes you sit down and just do it.
There has got to be more than this.
Will Kimbrough, man, thank you so much for making some time for us over here.
Thank you.
Crossing back over the tracks, the river, to talk with us, and congrats on the Grammy Nom.
Thank you.
My dude, for songwriting no less.
Yeah, and it's the American Roots song, and so my fellow nominees include strangely not American, but great songwriter Mark Knopfler, Iron and Wine, Sierra Farrell,
Fine company.
Not to forget Aoife O'Donovan. So I mean, to me, it's like one of those categories. It's like, wow,
yeah,
these are people that I admire.
I'd say you've made it again.
Over and over again. Making it.
I mean, that's
what it used to be.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's funny. Well, I want to talk about what it used to be and what it is now.
Yeah.
And to me, I just want to set the table by saying that you exist for me in a very elite club of cats that are like kind of triple threats, and there's probably more threats than 3. But to me, it's like you're an outstanding instrumentalist, you're an outstanding guitar player, and you're an outstanding singer, and you're an artist. And I put, I think of Daryl Scott is, a guy in that camp, and not too many else. Tim O'Brien, Aoife O'Donovan, he aforementioned. So it's a really quite an honor to have you here. And it's you and that club are folks that I'm on the outside of the club kind of being like, man, that is the game right there. And I want to know this from the beginning, because this is maybe I'll say it like this. When I was a kid, I took it for granted that if you were a musician or you made records, you obviously wrote the songs on the records and you sang them and you played the instrument, at least one of the instruments. And it was only much later that I learned that is not always the case. And so maybe I could ask, what was it that first like kind of caught your ear that made you want to be this guy that you've been?
When I was a kid on the Gulf Coast of Alabama, we had a fantastic radio station, because I was a kid at the age where music would really catch you, like say 10, 11, 12 years old in the mid 70s. So let's just say it was 74 to 76. And this station was playing all the music that came out then that was, they would literally play, a 20-minute track off the Allman Brothers at Fillmore East, and then they'd play something off the first Elvis Costello record, or the first Tom Petty record, or the first Graham Parker record, or the first Joe Jackson record, and then they'd play In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson, and then they'd play Frank Zappa, and then they'd play, Van Morrison. So that was, and they played the first 3 Springsteen records. In fact, on the Born to Run tour, on my 12th birthday, was the first night he played at this 1,000-seat theater in Mobile. It was like $4 a ticket. I got an electric guitar that day, and I got a $4 ticket to see Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. They played 2 nights at this 1,000-seat theater. So if they sold out both nights, they grossed $8,000. Just saying, the E Street Band. So it was early, but that station was rewarded for helping break Born to Run. It was it was in the process at the time by playing 2 nights. And so I left that show with a head.
Why rewarded? Was that?
Well, no, I mean they felt like they needed they couldn't play the arena yet. So they played the 1,000-seat theater and they added a night. But I mean, there's not a lot of places where they played more than one night on that tour. You can look, it's well documented. Springsteen's, tours.
I was just asking because I was like, in my mind, I was like, did radio stations, were they promoters for acts back then? Did they have like skin in the game for a particular show?
Well, sometimes they did, but not in this case. But still, he played 2 nights, and I don't know, I'm making more of that maybe than I should, but at the same time, it just shows the power of that kind of access. I was talking to Doyle over at Grimey's this morning, and he was talking about when he was a kid, and they briefly lived in Wisconsin, and there was a radio station that would play some night of the week. They'd play 6 albums in a row and only play a commercial at the side A, side B break of records. And we were talking about the first time we heard like an XTC record or something like that. And the first time he heard one of the early Police records was one of those nights. And just talking about those formative. Yeah. And so for me, it was like being a music fan. Yeah. And I wanted to learn how to do it. Yep. And so, I asked my parents for an electric guitar. And I didn't start on acoustic. I started on electric and a little amp. And I came home from that Springsteen show, and there was my guitar. I didn't know how to play it at all, but I had this red electric guitar and this little amp.
Amazing.
And just started learning how to play. And actually, the first thing that we did was write songs because we didn't know how to learn covers. None of us had taken any lessons. We were just in a room with a drum set and a bass and a little bass amp and a guitar. And what do we do now? So it was like us? Me and my friends in the neighborhood.
So they kind of caught the bug too. All you kids together.
I recruited them. Yeah. It was like painting the fence at Tom Sawyer's house, you know. And but 6 months later, we played a show at a skating rink that had bands every Saturday night. So my whole thing was to be playing electric guitar in a rock and roll band. Mm-hmm. And I did it, like I was still 12. And my parents were out there like, what are they doing up there playing, Kiss songs,
And that's amazing. And also is a testament to sort of that entrepreneurial spirit that is just basic to the actual personality of an artist that persists. Yeah. That like the consummate hustle. In my own small way, I can relate. Like when I was in college, I had a bluegrass band that was like, it kind of hit. And it was part of the reason why that's part of the reason why I'm here today. Right. Is paid my rent, Yeah. And my mentality was such that we like learned 3 songs. There was a couple of guys I could really pick, and the band had 3 songs. I booked a gig for a month later, and I'm like, we got to learn 6 more songs, guys. And it was always like that, it's just like fill the, make the opportunity, and then you're sort of forced to rise to the occasion. Yeah, or do your best.
I call it the desired obligation. Yes. Which is like we talked about Patreon earlier, and I do that every month. And I started it, of course, like everybody else in 2020, because I was at home for the first time in decades for a whole season, which is on one hand, personally, kind of a melancholy thought. On the other hand, playing music, well, that's what I've been doing. And going out of town. So I started that, and that obligation to have a song every month and a podcast every month, and it makes you sit down and just do it, and that doesn't always make your best work, but the fact that you're doing work all the time makes it more likely that you will do good work on a more regular basis. Absolutely. Or it seems like that.
I think that's you got to show up, what are you miss 100% of the shots you don't take kind of idea.
Right.
And also another thing about that, because I can relate to that as well, the desired obligation, is the throughput makes you a little less precious about any one thing. Where, if you have like the big gig coming up, then it's like, oh my God, the results of this gig, my whole mental health for the next 2 years is going to be based on the outcome. But if you got shows that you're just in a rhythm of playing shows, it's just, this is what tonight's show was, win, lose, or draw.
And living in this town of Nashville for now 37 years, when I moved here, I moved a few blocks from here, to Chapel Avenue in winter of '88, and have spent at least half the year away the whole time. So I've only really lived here for like 18 years. But or like Charlie Watts said, about playing in the Stones on their 20th anniversary. What's it like being in the Stones for 20 years? He said, 5 years of playing, or it's the 25th anniversary, 5 years of playing, 20 years of waiting around. But, so we moved here, but I met people along the way who really could thrive in the big gig that everything's going to hinge upon. And some of those people went on to pretty huge careers.
Drop some names for me for fun.
I'm trying to think of somebody that, probably mostly it would be people who were songwriters. I don't know. My brain's less about it, and also bands that got, okay. One is Jay Joyce. That's it for a producer. That's a giant name to me. Isn't
his studio at the end of this block?
I think so.
It is, yeah. The church that he's got there. Yeah.
And so Jay was in a band called In Pursuit, and they had, gigantic 80s hair, and they were like an 80s pop band. And Chris Feinstein was in that band too, and who's been gone for like well over 10 years, which is crazy to think about. And then Chris went on to be in the Questionnaires with Tom Littlefield and Doug Lancio. And Tom is here in town. He's one of the most smart songwriters I've ever known in my life, and he's just sort of doing his thing on his own time now. It's not really part of a publisher. I mean, the business has changed so much that, and I'll say this too. I'm just jumping all over the place.
I love it. No, this is what we do.
But I moved here in a band that was working already, and it was hard for me to pull away from that. We got signed to an EMI Capitol Records label in New York within the first year.
That was the
Will and the Bushmen.
Bushmen, yeah.
And so we got signed. We were, the right age, the right kind of music, college radio kind of music.
How old were you when you got signed?
24.
Yeah.
And so, and we had already been a band for like 4 or 5 years, and we had put out an EP, an album, and a cassette, and a 45 that got good press, got written up on our own in Spin and other magazines that used to mean a lot, and got to go play in New York, and the labels we played for all the major labels, and then we finally got signed. But I remember that feeling like all of a sudden the shackles were on, because I'd been in a band that made our own record, for better or worse, whether it was great or not, and made a single and toured all over the country. And I liked that, being in charge of my own what's happening.
Destiny, yeah.
And more people in the band sang lead. We had a couple of guys that would sing some of the songs, and I sang most of it. The label insisted I sing all the songs, all that stuff that comes with, pop music. And I guess part of me, I was just, now you call it following your gut, But I went along, and I remember those couple of years just seemed really long. I was in my mid-20s and not very mature, but also with a group of people that I'd already worked with for like 5 years, and you could tell that we didn't fit. And I'll never forget playing for, the distribution company was called EMI Angel, and it was the biggest record company in the world at that time. This was 1989. Played for the EMI Angel meeting at the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta. And we played at like 8 o'clock in the morning for like a breakfast. And everybody was out there with those Miami Vice kind of suits on, and pastels and shoulder pads and big glasses. And we played, and there was a video screen, literally like a video screen from the 80s.
Yeah.
And we were just up there in our jeans and t-shirts like we always wore, and I looked at the screen and I thought, oh yeah, this is not going to work for us. And I knew that then, and our record was brand new.
You'd already signed.
We were signed. The record was just coming out, and I was just we don't work in this.
How were you allowed to persist up to that point, even within the label system? Like, wasn't the A&R guy like trying to coach you up on your wardrobe?
Well, but there were, the replacements had been signed, and REM was big, and it was that. Mm-hmm. You had the Smithereens, Hoodoo Gurus, all these bands that sort of were people were going to see, people were buying their records. And so we were going to be in that world too. And you also have to understand that like the A&R guy, that's the head of A&R that signed us, he was probably younger than I am now, but to me he seemed like an old man.
Yeah.
He was like a gray-headed guy and rode around in a limousine. But he was a great guy. He was, and I mean, in some of these people, Charles Koppelman was the head of the whole thing, and he's like this music industry legendary business guy, really a song publishing guy, but from the old like Brill Building days. And then his partner Don Rubin was the A&R guy. So Charles had done all the business and started the label, bought and sold all this publishing. At the time, like huge deals for the music business. And but then we were actually label mates with Daryl Scott, who you mentioned.
Yeah.
He in his pop career, which I think lasted one record for this label.
Fair.
And we were also label mates with Vanilla Ice, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles soundtrack, which was a big record.
I think of all of these names together.
Wilson Phillips.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hold on.
And
So what you have? That was their big hit.
Wilson Phillips. Hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on for one more day. And anyway, so it was just a strange world to be in.
Yeah.
And I remember going to parties at the New Music Seminar in New York, and they had a huge stereo set up in a giant hotel room with a view over Manhattan, and we're drinking the free drinks and ordering the free room service, and then we had just gotten my first like CD player. This is, the 80s. And I had a CD of the Rolling Stones, Exile on Main Street. And so we put it in at the party. And we were talking to a young record executive from England, and he didn't know the record at all. And so we just told him it was some new band from Boston. And he was totally believing it. And I mean, I remember thinking, wow, we are really with people who do not care that much about music like the way we do.
Yeah.
We had records all over the floor and cassettes in the van and playing each other's stuff. To this day, I went by the record store on the way over here today.
Yeah. But there was a positive result, at least momentarily, with that relationship, right? There was a hit record or something happened.
But a lot of positive things happened. I bought a house on Benjamin Street, and I was neighbors with Dave Jakes, the great bassist that worked with John Prine forever. And I bought put money down on a cheap East Nashville house back in the 80s. And I bought a Toyota pickup truck. So those things are very positive. We got to tour. Our advance, we used it to buy a van and a trailer. And we toured. But I'll never forget, there's a lot of positive, but just the eye-opening things like there was public radio in France was playing our record. And I remember Lou Reed had that great record out called New York, and REM had a record out maybe called Green. And we were number one on public radio in France, and like number two was REM, and number three was Lou Reed. I mean, it was just this week, and this printout came in the mail, from France, because that's the way the world worked, right? And so our manager went to call the label and said, "Is the record out in France?" And they said no. And they weren't interested at all in a domestic release in Europe. And we even sent our manager, we played a couple of like fraternity parties in the South, and took the money and sent our manager, even though we're signed to an international label, we paid for our manager to go to Europe and try to get us a licensing deal. It was... And there is, again, that entrepreneurial small spirit of like, maybe we can do it ourselves. But when you're signed to a label, you're not really, you've handed it over to somebody else. And if it's not working, it's just not going to be working. Anyway, that's a really long story about a blip in my life.
Sure. But I mean, it was awesome that you got to take advantage of some of that like firepower, that was kind of a springboard, you could say.
Yeah, we got to go make a record at Bearsville in Woodstock, and, just making the engineer was the guy who engineered Lou Reed's New York record. And Jeffrey Lesser is a great engineer. He also made a ton of Barbra Streisand records, which are great sounding records too. And he told me all these stories about comping her vocals on two 24-track machines synced up together, and her doing like 47 vocals and then having to bounce it down to one.
back in tape with tape.
But then working with Lou Reed and making that record, which is a very, conceptual. I don't know the last time you've heard it, but like it's one guitar panned hard left, one guitar panned hard right, the bass and the drums in the middle, and then Lou Reed's voice like in your face, like he's pressed up against the glass,
dry as
and just and it's amazing.
One of the things that interests me with this podcast, and I tend to just go this way with ours, is I guess it gets, I don't know, philosophical is not quite the right word, but we'll just use that one for want of a better. But thinking about this, you're already kind of hinting at this tension between fitting in and not doing things your own way, and taking advantage of a team to help your career is one thing that I've faced at many points in my life, and even now. And I've always kind of tended to be, I like to do things myself. I know when, at least if I'm answering the emails, it's annoying to answer the emails, but I know they got answered. And, there's a control side of that, but there's also just like, such a wonderful freedom in just kind of eating what you kill. And can you speak to how you've navigated, or I guess, do you feel that tension yourself, and between wanting to do things your own way and trusting a team, even if it's one other person or something, and then how you've negotiated that tension over the years?
Well, I'll start by saying we live in the age where one of the biggest pop artists of all time is kind of still making like bedroom pop. Billie Eilish and her brother, I mean, so they're doing it the way I always like to do it the best, like the little 4-track. I mean, they're not using the 4-track cassette, I don't think, but it's the equivalent.
Modern equivalent, yeah.
Yeah, and so we do still live in that time, and that time started with whoever did it first, and Robert Johnson in the hotel room, and now Billie Eilish in the adjoining bedrooms in the suburban house with computers. I'm very trusting of people, but I just didn't really feel like, I think when you're in the situation with a corporate label, then you have to have a manager who can go to bat for you. And so that was really the issue, was we didn't really have that. We didn't, and it's not about somebody that can go constantly battle them. It's somebody that has the relationship or develops the relationship so that, your idea can be translated into a good idea to a corporate mind. And so if you don't have that, and then you don't have a chance, really, unless it's just pure luck somehow. And that's part of the equation every day of our lives anyway, too. Is like, did I show up somewhere today that will bring me luck? I mean, I don't think about that, but I'm only thinking about it now because we're talking about it.
Yeah.
You can look back and say, oh, well, that brought me, I was on the road with Todd Snider, barely making a living, having a great time, and away from my young family. I had a baby at home, and then too. But that's where I met Jimmy Buffett, and that's what he somehow saw in me. I'll be honest. I think he really loved Todd, and then they had a huge falling out, and I was just the guy that stood next to Todd, and he was like, "What about that guy?" I mean, it may be much more than that, but I don't even know how he would have heard my music. But I got reached out to like 5 or 6 years after I met the guy. And so but that's proof that show up a lot of places and, be nice, play music when asked, do your thing. Just go do it. Yeah. Take those, take that gig when you only have 3 songs and work up the other 6 and do it. I mean, that's how my band, the Bis-quits, formed. So after the Bushman, here's what I was leading to is back to that working within a big corporate structure kind of thing. It was very short-lived for us, first of all. And so when we finally we begged to be dropped for like a year and a half. So that period from like 1990 to 1992 was just us trying to get dropped. And that was not a good time. But I formed this band called the Bis-quits with Michael Grimes, Grimey, and Tommy Womack, and a great drummer who's had physical ailments that don't allow him to play anymore, named Tommy Meyer, but a great drummer. And so we formed a band, and it was almost like having this other side. It was a side project. And we booked a gig opening for Jay Joyce's band, Iodine. But we didn't have any songs. We were just friends. And so we went over to 310 Chapel Avenue around the corner from here and wrote a set, played. And then next thing you know, like within a year, we were over at Brad Jones' place making a record, which we just paid for ourselves. And then John Prine and his manager, Al Bonetta, and Dan Einstein, who later had the bakery over here, and now all three of them are gone. But they came to hear us play. And we got signed to John Prine's label, Oh Boy Records.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it just goes on and on. But I was going to say, too, that one thing, that if you got signed and had a manager that was good at getting you signed, but not good at getting the whole thing pushed over the next 10,000 mountain ranges that you need to go over to where your song's on the radio in more than like 3 places. But if you don't have that and you finally get out of your deal, then it takes the same amount of monumental optimism and energy that it took to get your band off the ground from the first gig in 1984 to moving to Nashville in 88 to having the record come out in fall of 89. It takes that same amount of energy and optimism and drive to just find the right manager. And some people just luck into it. But I didn't have it at that point. I just wanted to make some records. I felt like
when you started the Bis-quits.
Yeah. I was like, I'm gonna be 30 soon. It's monumental. Now I'm in my 60s. You know, it's like this monumental thing. I've got kids. I'm running out of time.
Sure.
Which to your earlier, I think you hinted at when things are not going your way. In retrospect, those can be the times when you sit up and do a bunch of good work. I mean, how many of your best songs have you written when you were just in a bad place?
A high percentage of them.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like because you have to do something to survive. And I don't mean to be dramatic about it, but there are times when that's true. And then how do you write about happiness? You know?
I have found that those hard times are much better for the songwriting, and that's nothing crazy to say, but that in time, like I'm in a happier place now, and it's interesting where to mine the creativity in this time in my life. Beautiful baby wife. Wow. But I notice now in hindsight how really addicted to the melancholy and the suffering I was, how much a part of it, my identity it was. All like my early songs, I'm like, God, dude, you just sing like you're about just hanging on for dear life. And I don't feel like that now,
right.
But I know why I was there, because it's kind of intoxicating to live there. And did your songs come from a similar place, and did you have to kind of relearn how to write songs from a more stable place? Or
yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's that young person's place of you have to be inspired, and the muse has to hit you, and you have to be in the right place at the right time. I mean, luckily I was in bands the whole time, and we wrote most of our songs for years, like together in the room, like jamming into those cassette jam boxes that had the great limiter built into them, where the tapes always sounded like, that's what I want my record to sound like. It's like, you know, and, but, then your band days, or after the Bis-quits, I decided I was going to be a solo artist, because I had at that point been in bands nonstop from age 12, and I was in my early 30s. And so, I had already been in bands, you know, for 20 years, and I was like 32. So I started and I had sold my house over here, which was a big mistake, but I sold my house over here and I was renting a house on the other side of town in the neighborhood I live now, which is actually not a big mistake. We live in a great neighborhood, and
I've been there. It's awesome.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Browns.
So, yeah,
right
it's
there.
just fantastic. And Browns is better than ever. They got a little music thing going on over there now. Terry Rickards is over there doing great stuff. And so I started writing and recording on my little 4-track and playing it for people and playing out for people. And then Todd Snider called and needed a guitar player. And so I went on the road with Todd because I had spent like a year living off of the proceeds from selling my house, which was nothing over here. You know, I sold my house for like $75,000 in East Nashville.
Yeah.
And but anyway, and I worked, and then it was just time for me to go back to work and make money, not just play showcases or play at Tuesday night at 12th and Porter. It was time for me to go have some kind of thing I could pay taxes on and support my family. So I went out with Todd Snider. And then, I know I'm jumping all over the place, but, with Todd, I could actually see somebody who had a real shot at, and has a career, but I also have learned along the way that you can do it the way I did it, or at least I can do it the way I did it.
Yeah.
That's the number one lesson.
You did do it the way you did it.
The way I do it, it's the way I do it.
Yeah.
But, and all along the way, I started getting opportunities. I think the first time I got called to go sing on a Kim Ritchie record, and that was the first time I'd really gotten a session, and I went and sang, and I saw Angelo was the producer, and Kenny Vaughn was playing guitar, and I was like, oh, these guys are really great at what they do. Like, they know how to do this. And so I started and I got to play on a couple of Todd records. I wrote with Todd, played on his records, and I was the guy who hung around the studio after the bass player and drummer would get some beer and sit around and be bored and leave. And with all due respect to bass players and drummers, but I was hanging around. And so that's when Todd, later asked me to produce records. And right 3 doors down from here, we've made 2 records, East Nashville Skyline, and then the follow-up, The Devil You Know, which is kind of like East Nashville Skyline Part 2 in a way, in a big way.
Yeah.
But yeah, and those records were done really just for I wanted the opportunity to do it. I mean, I think everybody got paid like $75 a day. Including myself.
Amazing. If I might interject a little story, because it was so important to me at the time. But I mentioned when you were coming in that East Nashville Skyline is top 5 records of all time for me. I mean, every single song on that record just hits me right in my heart. And I had such a life hinge moment with that record, which is related to what we've been talking about. But I had been hitting it so hard in my way, based out of Seattle, on the road, doing whatever I could. I mean, it was priorities 1 through 5 was to just make music and get better and meet more people. And I was 27. I played South by Southwest. Of course, if you're not, I had an unhappy experience where I was like one person in the room, and I paid all this money, and I'm just like, what? And time's running out. I'm going to be 30 soon, and that's when it's all over. And I walked down the 6th to Waterloo, and this is back when they had CD listening stations, and I had come across a Todd Snider record. I bet you definitely played on it, but it was just like somebody had a burned CD and they'd given me, like, it just said Todd Snider, and they were like, I think you'd like this record. And it had, oh God, there's so many of those funny, charming Todd songs on there. It's such that I saw East Nashville Skyline, the Tower, and I was like, oh, it's that guy. And hit the play button. It's like, old timer,
Too late to die young now.
Old timer, 5 and dimer, trying to find a way to age like wine somehow. And I just fucking poured tears at Waterloo. And it hit me so hard. And I bought the record, and I was like, I had to catch the plane back to Seattle later that day. And so I listened to it, and I was bawling on the plane. I mean, it was really like a weird moment for me, such that when a few years, maybe it was later that year, I can't remember, but it was just like time to either grow up and go to grad school or something, or move to Nashville, because I'd just done everything I could do. And the kind of music I liked was not in concert with what was happening in Seattle. It was like Modest Mouse was really hitting and Death Cab was big. And I like Doc Watson and I like Todd Snider. And I was just like,
needed to be here.
Yeah. And it was, so I moved here and, now I live 2 houses down from where the record was made. It's just like, anyway, so to talk to you and you were such an instrumental part of that record, it's just like kind of a wonderful moment for me. So thank you.
And I mean, that was I just watched that Dylan movie, A Complete Unknown, and 2 things. One, relating to Todd, I thought, I got to be around somebody as close as I'm going to get that was at the beginning of their career and when was that charismatic in his own way. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously it's not Bob Dylan, but still somebody that's coming in with a new song and playing it for an audience. And everywhere we went, people they got it. He was charismatic in that strange way that some people just are. Mm-hmm. If you're around them all day in the van or on the bus, and they, never, they have, personally they may not be fully formed yet. Let's just say.
Yeah. Well, he is a one of one.
Right. And also watching the way he, being in the band could be, I remember the falling out with Jimmy Buffett. It was we were opening for him at a giant arena in Florida. And Todd refused to play because Jimmy had told him a song. He said, you need to play, because Todd was on Jimmy's label. Mm-hmm. And so Jimmy invited him into his dressing room and said, why aren't you playing your song that's on the radio? And Todd was just, fuck you, don't tell me what to play. And, but now I realize too that it just takes, if you appreciate an artist's work, then you can't take them out of the equation, whatever they are.
Sure.
And you could call that. And another thing too, and I don't want to be too private about things, but like for the last 20 years, about once a year, I'd be talking to Buffett and he would say, hey, did you talk to Todd? And I'm like, yeah. And he'd be like, well, man, tell him I said hi. You could just tell he will. And then Todd would go, yeah, you've been writing with Buffett, right? And I'd be like, yeah, to tell him I said hi. Mm-hmm. And I would always do it. Mm-hmm. And I would say, do you want their info? Mm-hmm. And they never did, Mm-hmm. So whatever that was about. And a falling out can be permanent, Mm-hmm. But I always felt like they were from far away kind of loving each other. Like, I wish I could get it together to say hi to that guy again. Yeah. It's very strange.
It's a bittersweet story. It causes my heart a pang.
Yeah. But, so being around that was, and I was around Rodney Crowell when he was making that career comeback as a real artist. I played with him around the time of Houston Kid and all those records that came after that. And so I did also get a little addicted to that school I was getting to go to. Mm-hmm. I'm with these people, I'm playing guitar and singing harmony, and they're so much better than me in so many ways, but they need me for certain things. And not just to play guitar parts that are already on records, but like to make up parts for new songs, and talk about books and records and sit there and just have your life expanded by somebody. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big reason why people move to Nashville and stay.
Absolutely.
If you're interested in that, then it's a gold mine. I mean, if you're interested in some other things at places like, I was in the Pacific Northwest yesterday, and there's definitely parts of me that would love to be able to live there sometime. Mm-hmm. But it's not going to happen, I don't think. So I'm just going to be here, I think.
I mean, everything you do in life is a sacrifice for something else.
Right.
Right. There's no escaping that. I wonder if you could talk about, this is wonderful. Thank you for sharing this. Oh, yeah. And I mean, to me, what you're describing is the dream for an artist, to just be in a place where you're welcomed in, or you find a way to fit in and be of service, and then you just grow exponentially in the presence of these people.
No, I mean, I've definitely learned it, and I mean, we all know that if given an opportunity in a different way, you go in a different direction. Mm-hmm. You'd still be you, but you be in a different direction. There's nothing better than playing like a nice sized theater full of people that are there to just sit and listen to you talk and play songs.
Mm-hmm.
But that hasn't been the day to day for me,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so, but yeah, getting to play with Todd, getting to play with Rodney, getting to play with Emmylou, getting to work with Buffett. And then, you know, my relationship with Shemekia Copeland has been pretty amazing. I mean, we've made 4 records together, tons of, you know, record of the year, Mojo magazine, blah, 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 you know, nominated for three Grammys this time around. The previous one was nominated. Getting to say the things that we're saying on those records in that kind of a context with her voice is another, it is the dream. It's like you're an artist, you make your own records, you write, other people do them, do the songs. You're supporting your family by working and making a living, but your job is to be creative. Mm-hmm. And then for the last 7 years, and been doing this songwriting with soldiers work and post-traumatic growth songwriting through the Warrior PATHH program.
Mm-hmm. I've wanted so badly to crack into that because I think I would be good at it. And I love it. I think that's such a wonderful service.
You would be great at it. Yeah.
But continue.
Well, I mean, and that it's all back around to that same point that you're kind of making is like, I'm given this, to me, it's always an opportunity. Mm-hmm. Opportunity of show is an opportunity to play my own songs and tell my stories. An opportunity, which is rare now. I don't go play guitar for people on the road anymore, except Emmylou. Mm-hmm. And it's not a rule or anything. There hasn't been anybody that's called in a long time that was like, I don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. And it's special with her. And we're, as far as I know, hardly doing anything this year, which is freeing in a way and makes you miss it. And I guess that's a good...
It's nice in its way, too.
Yeah. Instead of being burned out on it, it's like, hope we get to do some Emmylou songs, you know. Mm-hmm. And just playing with her, you know, that you're always in, when I didn't finish my Bob Dylan movie story. I was talking about Todd Snider and how being around somebody that sort of mercurial and could turn on a dime, and, you know, when something offended his sensibilities, instead of compromising the way I felt like I had tried to do with the record label I had been signed to, I felt like Todd would just walk away.
He'd just burn it down.
Yeah. And we had worked at Bearsville Studios, and the replacements had just been there, and they had been with a producer that they walked out on. And the people at the studio were like, yeah, those guys came in here and they were like smashing the headphone boxes, and then they were gone. It was like, and then the label paid for it all, and they went to another producer. And I was thinking, I don't want to be like that.
Yeah.
But I kind of wish I could be. Mm-hmm. But I'm not. So there you go. And then, but I was sitting there watching A Complete Unknown, and I'm sitting here, and to my left is my wife, Jessica, and to her left is her mother, who grew up in New York, and she's born in 47. So, you know, in 65, she was 17 or whatever, you know. She saw that whole folk scene, and particularly loved Dave Van Ronk, and she, of course, loved Joan Baez and Joni Mitchell as well. But I mean, talking about New York, Joan Baez. But she saw Dylan, the gig after Newport was Forest Hills. And I think at that point he had the band playing with him. Mm-hmm. But it still was the second time he, quote, went electric, unquote. And the folkies booed. But anyway, I just kept looking over to my mother-in-law, and she loved it. And she doesn't just love anything. Mm-hmm. She's super critical and super picky about what she likes. And she just said, you know, they brought that back to life, like the village and that world. And she said, it doesn't matter whether it's all factually true or we all know all the details of everything that happened. It's just that it brought it alive for a minute. Mm-hmm. And she said that was really great. So that really, when I'm reading somebody's Facebook post about like the Dylan thing, it's not all true, you know, it's like, whatever, it's a biopic.
Yeah.
You really thought it was going to be the whole story? Yeah. I mean, come on.
That's a pretty good review. Maybe I'll watch it.
Yeah. I thought it was, I mean, that was fun. The context of that made it fun. And I'm all for having some fun.
Yeah.
For God's sake.
I mean, why else are we doing this?
For God's sake,
It's as much fun as possible. Speaking of fun, I wonder if you might be so gracious as to entertain us
Absolutely.
with a song here in the studio.
Yeah.
What are you going to play?
I'm going to play a song called "For the Life of Me," and it's a title track from the most recent record, which came out last year. Mm-hmm. So I'm starting a new year without anything on the horizon that's like a new, in 2024, I started the year, literally the first thing I did in 2024 was do sessions to finish Shemeka's record. Mm-hmm. And then I finished my record. I mean, that year was so epic. And the week my record came out, we played Jazz Fest with the Coral Reefer Band, which was Jimmy Buffett's band. And we did because he had been gone since September 23. We were invited to play like a tribute to him. And so we had the whole band, and I was a guest, sort of a honorary Coral Reefer. And we had Trombone Shorty and Sonny Landreth and Irma Thomas in the Preservation Hall Jazz Band. And we played the big stage to sort of close one of the days at Jazz Fest. So we played in front of 40,000 people with like one little rehearsal.
Incredible.
And then that night I got invited. Jimmy's daughter Savannah was asked by Pres Hall to do something related to her dad that night. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't play music, so she said, well, Will, that song you wrote with my dad that the Preservation Hall Band played on the record and at the show today, would you play it with him at Preservation Hall? And so we went over there at midnight and played the midnight show. And I mean, that was just the first half of last year. Mm-hmm. And then it went on, and just travel and travel and travel. But still, like the Songwriting with Soldiers work, I just got back from the Pacific Northwest at 1:00 in the morning this morning, and do this post-traumatic growth work. And that really is probably my favorite thing I do now, because it's such a challenge. You travel all day somewhere, and then you get there and eat dinner with a group of people who are combat veterans and first responders who are struggling with post-traumatic stress, and half of them, seriously considered, if not attempted, to take their own lives. But the atmosphere is not that heavy because they're in this amazing program. It's like peer-to-peer post-traumatic stress, post-traumatic growth. All the people that work at these facilities have been through the program. They're all combat veterans. So there's nobody that, it's the opposite of the legendary, going to the VA and the VA counselor's like, so tell me how you feel, and then I'm writing you a prescription. Yeah. And with all due respect to counselors, because I mean I have huge
hard
respect,
job.
Very hard job.
But
and
the spirit of healing prevails with it.
But just having my record, it was a year when I made a record that I thought was one of the best things that I've ever done, but it wound up being a footnote to a lot of other things that I did, and that's I mean that might have been soul crushing in another year, but for the fact that I produced a fourth Shemekia record in a row, Shemekia Copeland, and helped write most of the songs and played on it. And, part of my job on those kind of records, for instance, with Shemekia, at one point early in 24, we had 2 days in a row where we were getting the special guests on there. And one day was a whole day with Jerry Douglas where, it's a blues record, a modern blues record, where we're asking Jerry Douglas to play the blues, which he can, of course, but he still comes from that progressive bluegrass world. Yeah. And his brain, and you'll have to sort of direct him a little bit, and we get him to play his lap steel through an amp real loud. And so I spent the whole day, and what ended up happening was we're working for about an hour, and Jerry finally said, can you just maybe come out and play guitar with me instead of me just overdubbing on this stuff? I really need somebody. So I started playing rhythm guitar with him. And the next thing I know, he's like, no, why don't you take the first half of the solo? And I'm like, okay. So I'm just literally interacting in real time with Jerry Douglas. And and I'm getting paid. Not that that's the end all be all, but the fact is, I'm over there. I'm bringing home the bacon for my family, playing guitar all day with Jerry Douglas.
I mean, It's the dream again.
And the next day we had Luther Dickinson from the North Mississippi All-Stars. And the same thing happened. I wasn't holding a guitar up going, hey, you want me to jam along? I was just sitting in there going, it sounds great, Luther. Let's just punch you in on that bridge because it does change key there. I need you to go to B flat there. And he's like, all right, okay, hold on. Let me. And then he came in and he was like, and Luther is like, he's like Jerry. He's like one of those magic, positive people, no matter what.
Yeah.
He's like happy about the saddest thing. And okay, let's try it again. This is great, man. This is great. Can I use your guitar? Can I use your amp? Oh man, this is great. Oh, and he's making these crazy, like super distortion kind of sounds. And then within about 90 minutes, he was like, would you come out here and play with me so I'm not just overdubbing?
Yeah.
Next day, spending all day playing with Luther Dickinson. I mean, it's like, that was just a year ago.
Magic. So
anyway.
The takeaway is just you made yourself available. And I feel like that's emblematic of a lot of your life and career, musically speaking.
The other day...
You're not throwing elbows.
The other day, I was playing a session with Mike Bubb, who was, for years...
Love him.
One of the great bass players of any kind of music, but of course a legendary bluegrass musician. And was a longtime member of Del McCurry's band, for a long time. Amazing guy. And he can play anything. But I was playing a session, and the producer had asked me to bring a banjo. So I brought my banjo. Not really a banjo player, but I can play a banjo, you know. But
in the 3-finger... in the Earl Scruggs way?
Probably with a thumb pick and bare fingers, just like I play guitar, And so I had to play. I didn't have to. They said, "Can you play banjo on this one?" And if it had been a few years before, I'd have been really kind of like, I'm embarrassed that I'm playing in front of Mike Bubb. Mm-hmm. But nowadays it's more like I just played the banjo, and he came in and kind of made a banjo joke, and like anybody would, I don't know what the point of that is I think over time you grow comfortable in your own skin. Somebody asks you to play a banjo, it's like, sure, I'll play a banjo.
Yeah. I'll be Will on the banjo.
Well, let's play my song. I love it. For the Life of Me. This song is one of those songs that came together from grief, from one of these difficult conversations we have with old friends from back home, and it's related to the division in our world, in our country, and I just couldn't. I love this person so much. We're still friends. He's kind of my window into the opposite side of politics, because we love each other, and it's the kind of person who's like super conservative, but then will call you on a Sunday and say, hey, I've got my copy of Miles Davis Kind of Blue, but what should I go to next? Like, what else should I listen to by Miles Davis? And then I'll tell him, make him a little list. And like 3 days later, he calls me and tells me, I really liked, Miles Smiles, but I didn't really like Bitches Brew as much. But I liked, My Funny Valentine. That's beautiful. That kind of person that would actually talk to you about really great music.
Yeah.
But has this other sensibility. Anyway, so I wrote a song for the Life of Me.
Let's do it.
For the life of me, I can't see the world the way you do. I'd bet $1,000 it's the same damn way from me to you. And it's probably just a circle that the sad old human race is cursed to walk. The irony that we are simply animals who learn to drive and talk. Now I greet each new sunrise delightedly, while you look down your nose ever spitefully. I have searched high and low, trying so hard to see, but I cannot understand for the life of me. You see blue and I see black. It's empathy we lack and claim to want, while the history we seem doomed to repeat is here to terrify and haunt. For the life of me, I cannot sympathize with your beliefs, nor you with mine. We would rather fiddle while the whole thing burns. Yeah, brother, that's just fine. Now I greet each new sunrise delightedly, while you look down your nose ever spitefully. I have searched high and low, trying so hard to see, but I cannot understand for the life of me. You may greet each new sunrise delightedly, while I look down my nose ever spitefully. We may search high and low, trying so hard to see, but I cannot understand. You cannot understand. We cannot understand for the life of me.
That was fantastic, man. Thank you.
And that was a lot. You asked me to play a song, I talked for 10 minutes.
No, it's great. I mean, one of the joys about both playing shows, I think, and seeing shows is to hear something about the song that you're playing. And I feel like it's a part of the performer's package. You know, if you're just up there playing your songs with no context, it's like, oh man, I could have listened to the record at home.
And you know, that song is such a, it's about self-reflection and empathy. Mm-hmm. And I'm addicted to it. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm addicted to practicing gratitude. Mm-hmm. And that, a lot of that comes from, you know, dabbling into like Thich Nhat Hanh books.
Sure.
But Miracle of Mindfulness and all that stuff. But also being part of post-traumatic growth, that's literally what you've got. Folks that I spent election night with a group of combat veterans writing in this post-traumatic growth program. And that was in one way a good escape from election night and just doom scrolling and watching, you know, flipping channels. Mm. I did that later, like that night between like 2 and 5 a.m. But I was with folks that I wouldn't otherwise have known at all or run into probably. And one guy was really kind of being political and kind of abrasive. And at the same time, he was completely open about his trauma and his relationship with suicide, which was a very close relationship. Mm-hmm. But then there's also people learning gratitude. And that is such a big thing. And I think that's one of the ways that you learn to write songs without having to have like a life of drama all the time. Mm-hmm. Like where you can just go into the place and look at it and write down. And, you know, doing that kind of songwriting work, you're with folks almost always that have never written a song in their life, never even thought about it. And so it's a little bit, there's an element of it that's like pulling a rabbit out of a hat. But you don't want it to be just that, you know? And, but I always tell the story of, when John Prine wrote Hello in there, and I think the second verse starts with John and Loretta live in Omaha. And ever since I was a little kid hearing that song, that line would come and I would just picture these just plain folks in Nebraska, you know? And I always say that when I'm at one of those post-traumatic growth writing or a retreat for songwriting with soldiers, or like a songwriting camp or something. If I've guessed at somebody's, I've never put together my own. I'm not that. Anyway, I've worked at a lot of them before, but I always say that. I say, if you're talking about something and you want to put it in a setting, just write down what it is. John Prine said he wanted to figure out a way to say John and Loretta live in Omaha. So he did. He said, John and Loretta live in Omaha, and it's devastating. Now it's in his hands. There's a lot more to it than just that.
There's some secret magic.
But also just listening to other people and writing down what they say is a great exercise. I mean, you don't want to just do it in the public space, and be like a spy. But songwriters are like that, spies of the heart, kind of, And so, anyway, I get to do that, and I just did it yesterday. I just flew home from SeaTac, and we wrote a song. We used their words. The Darden Smith is the guy who started that program, and then with a retired Navy guy who was part of EOD, which is Explosive Ordnance Disposal, and it's a very traumatized community, especially and including their spouses and families and communities around them, and the people that go take care of a bomb,
Yeah.
And they're most likely to lose their fingers and noses and eyes and ears, and they all have hearing aids, and even the youngest people have these 2 hearing aids, and they blasted their hearing out, and they're kind of, and I can relate to that. But anyway, I mean, it's just it is addicting to get in that position and listen to people, and then have to decide that moment within this really short period of time of going, okay, I think it could be called this, and I think the chorus could go this way, and then just in a way you find yourself sort of selling the idea. On the other hand, you're really trying to be sensitive and get everybody's,
because it's a collective song.
Oh yeah, right? I mean, I was with 8 people, and we met. So I got introduced, and then
tricky.
2.5 hours later, we're singing a song that's finished. And I do. I'm addicted to that too. That, and it's another sort of sacred obligation. I can't quit now.
Yeah,
I got to go do it.
Well, this is just a slight turn, but do you think you're like just on balance a basically positive person or an even-keeled person? Are you susceptible to melancholy? Have you as best as you understand yourself, you come across as like a pretty even-keeled guy.
I've learned to be even-keeled. And when I was a kid, I was a hot mess. And I think when I was a young person, I was, and I think I was born in '64, and I grew up in a community where somebody handed you a drink when you were like 13, and probably a joint.
Sure.
And other stuff too. And so I started all that stuff young, real young, way toxically young. And I just was lucky to not be as addictive as other people I knew, more addicted to like playing the music and running track and all this other stuff I did, reading books. Are you
sober now, or are you in recovery?
I'm not. I don't drink. If I really want to drink, I drink a drink. Yeah. At the end of the day. But most of the time I try to talk myself out of it.
Yeah. Nice.
I've had years of sobriety, but I'm not, I cannot qualify myself as a sober person.
Yeah.
No.
Fair. I mean, it wasn't a test either. I'm not. And what I was thinking was just that something, as you live in this fraught industry for long enough, and you watch, folks fall off, here and there. And I noticed that, like, as addictive a personality as I have, I never really let it get in the way of a bigger dream. Yeah. And I like, that's the only thing that's kind of kept me like, okay. But I'm always curious about
somewhat blind luck of DNA, probably. Some of it.
No, for sure.
My dad would have a pack of cigarettes on the bookshelf, and one night he'd come home and smoke them all. And then there wouldn't be any cigarettes in the house for like 6 months. Yeah. Or he'd have a pack up there and pull one out every once in a while.
Extremities running in the blood.
I mean, but then my mother's, both her parents were alcoholics. So I mean, it's in the human family. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then this is sort of related, but as you know, few people have watched the industry change more than you, maybe just like your demographic. And with that, it's easy to imagine a fella who, especially had some success early on, just kind of being recalcitrant, resistant to just the constant flux. And how have you like just made peace with the way things are now and the obligation to post? You just mentioned you launched a Patreon. Do you find yourself kind of dragging your heels, or do you kind of accept it in or do you even maybe enjoy it? I don't know. Throw some words at that.
I learned during the journey of like being on a major label and then being on Prine's label that I really just enjoyed playing, writing, making records, and performing more than any of the other stuff. I didn't enjoy planning costume changes, although that could probably be fun if I was in that situation or what, but like I just knew what I was passionate about, and I think you have to follow those things because you're going to put the time in those things. And the other things you're going to be, unless you do have a big giant team you've been able to put together and everybody's getting paid, and I just don't live in that world. So I've tried to concentrate on the things that I love the most. And that also includes just a life of like, I love to read all the time. I love to listen to new music and especially like old music I've never heard. I love jazz records and stuff like that. But but I'm also used to traveling, and I can do one of these post-traumatic growth trips where I traveled all day and we worked that night, and then I go back to the room and work on the lyrics and work on the notes and make sure it's legible, go back the next morning, have breakfast, set up the little mini recording thing and record the song, and then go back to the airport and get home. I was tired last night, but I didn't get sick or anything.
Lethal. Yeah.
That's it. It was just so I'm resilient in that way. And I've learned too, like to be put on the spot to write a song, and especially when you're with people that have been in some kind of, psychological trauma, you're definitely obligated. Like you will not fail to do something and, to finish a song and use somebody else's words and be respectful to it. And it does change you. It makes me less precious about a lot of things. And sometimes to my peril, I think sometimes, but I don't know. I mean, it is just your life, and time passes so fast. I mean, I've got a daughter getting married in the spring, and she's 29, and I've got a daughter in grad school. She's 23. I'm in my 60s. I mean, not the kind of stuff when you're in a rock and roll band, that's not what you look forward to. But yet here I am, and it's the best thing ever. Life is better than ever. So I just find that if I'm better at being busy, I'm less melancholy and less moody if I'm more sober, more busy, doing the things that I'm actually set out to do. And when I drank more, for sure, like that would be part of the equation, to be like, well, we're going on stage in 2 hours, where's the alcohol? And then after the show, where's the rest of the alcohol, And, but I learned over time, my wife and I have a interesting way of looking at it. It's like if somebody's trying not to drink, like having, sober January or whatever, it's like, you can't just spend 2 days. You got to like let it get all out of your system. like physically and sort of mentally, like the habit of wanting to get the glass of wine at 5 o'clock or whatever. You have to let it all get out of your system, and then you'll feel better. You don't really feel better until it's all out. Mm-hmm. And you've forgotten about, like, you go through a night and you're like, I didn't even think about having a drink. Mm-hmm. And our friend Mary Gaucher, who's a brilliant artist, brilliant mind, she always says, you just have to take it every day, because she's a sober person for decades. And she says, you wake up in the morning and say, today, I'm not going to drink. Yeah. She's like, I do it every day. Yeah. And I say it to myself many times a day. Yeah. And so, anyway.
Pulse relays a story. Steve Pulse, our friend, another sober cat, that when he was in therapy, the guy, the phrase that he was taught or he overheard, which is great, it's just like, it's not like you don't have to drink or you can never drink. You just can't drink today. And if you just keep waking up and doing that, then great. For myself, I've noticed that if I just decide not to, I just won't. And there's something so clean and simple about that, rather than trying to have a balanced approach to it and just like stop yourself in it.
And we're lucky in that way too, because not everybody can do it that way. Yeah. Although Mary does it that way, and she was, she's definitely a recovery person. Mm-hmm. So there's that, and Pulse too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember seeing Justin Townes Earl. We were on that Cayamo cruise, and it was, my wife had just come through breast cancer and still wasn't finished with like reconstructive surgery and all this stuff. And we weren't drinking at all. And we were with Pulse and Sharon. And then we go on one of these, today the artists are getting to go to the beach in Jamaica. So we went to this beach in Jamaica and we're hanging out, and we saw Justin, and I don't mean to be, this isn't gossipy, but I just remember he was out in the water and he had a beer in his hand, and we were talking to him, and he said, I figured out I can drink. And both Steve and I were like, no, you can't. Mm-hmm. I mean, you are, but you can't.
Right.
And I mean, he wasn't around much longer. Yeah. I mean, and that's he's not here.
Yeah.
And so sad, but
it's really sad, man. I do a little acting, and I was just on a show that taped in October, a couple episodes, and one of the regulars was there, and I hung out with him in the trailer, like you do. You're just killing time, like you were talking about. There's just you do a little work, and then the rest of it's just waiting around. Mm-hmm. So you just it teaches you to get along with people. And we visited. He made me laugh. We traded stories about stupid acting gigs, and my friend called me, and he unlived himself. Mm-hmm. A couple of weeks ago, and it's just like, you don't know what's going on. It kind of makes me just. You don't know what's going on with people.
Right. And that's one of the things that post-traumatic growth teaches all those vets, which is a great thing. Not all of them, the ones that are in the program, which is a lot of people, but the program has grown exponentially in like 10 years, like by tenfold, or 1,000-fold. But, it's important to teach folks that when you meet someone, you don't know what's happening with them. And sometimes people we know really well. Sometimes people that we, a friend of mine took his own life a few years ago, and he had been a Episcopal priest who had been defrocked because he was an addict. And then he went to work as a drug and alcohol counselor in the prison system. Talk about doing the Lord's work. But at his memorial, it took 4 hours for all these big old bikers and just rough looking folks that had been in prison with him. Like, he saved my life. I wish I could have saved his. Mm-hmm. And a fellow counselor who was like a block away when my old friend was had started using again and took his own life. He said, I beat myself up because I wasn't there for him, but I didn't know he was suicidal. Mm-hmm. And when you're suicidal, someone has to restrain you physically until you're not suicidal anymore. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes there's miraculous. I've had a veteran tell me I was, had to describe the rifling inside of a barrel of a pistol because his tongue was sort of like teasing the inside of the pistol, like we're getting ready to shoot himself. And his dog walked up and licked him on the hand. And he suddenly realized, I got to take care of my dog. Mm-hmm. Who's going to take care of my dog? And he didn't want to die anymore, but he had to do something about his mental health at that point.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's but the more you hear about that, the more you realize it's just part of the human condition. And I mean, on one hand, we should have the right probably to take our own life if we want to, but on the other hand, it's so destructive and it opens up that it's so destructive.
It's so
to
destructive to everybody
around.
left behind, and they never recover.
But I've been melancholic and cynical, and but if I'm getting to do the things that I love, and I just have my life full. I've got the Kindle full of books. Mm-hmm. I'm always at the library at the limit of things
Fiction?
I can check out.
What do you mostly read? Fiction or
anything that I think will be good?
Yeah.
I think we live in a great golden age of nonfiction as well.
Sure.
Where for like the memoir used to not be a respected form, and now and I love really good nature writing and science writing, and I love fiction too, and I love well done crime fiction and spy fiction.
Sure.
I love all that stuff too.
I mean, we could just talk about this forever.
Yeah.
But, maybe I'll say one thing, which is that I have a fair number of writers on the podcast. I'm lucky, and the guest last week, the episode just published today, actually, was with an author named Adam Ross.
Oh yeah, did he write Mr. Peanut?
He did.
Yeah.
And he just but his second novel just came out 2 days ago, and it's just setting the world on fire. I'm really excited for him. But more than that, I'm almost finished with it, and it is so good. You should check it out. It's absolutely a wonderful book.
My wife's book club did Mr. Peanut, and he came to the book club.
Cool, yeah.
And it was fascinating. It's great. So I'm going to get the new Adam Ross book for sure. So yeah, reading, going to. I'm really trying to go over to the record store. There's a new record store. Daydream Records over here now, and then there's Grimey. So those are always. I went to the record store in Tacoma yesterday, High Voltage, and I just like to go be around it and see what's there, and even if I don't buy anything, and so yeah, I've learned to be really from going out with Todd and Rodney Crowell. Those were two pivotal experiences. I mean, I played with Rodney for 7 years. I played with Todd off and on for the last 20, but really for like 5 years straight, or maybe even less, 4 years straight. And all the straight is the wrong word to use, but listening to the way they could connect people by talking about the song. Mm-hmm. And I know it's a cliche to some people that were like, oh, guy's gonna sit there and tell this long story about the song. But in the singer-songwriter world,
we love the stories.
We love it, and the people that love the songs love to hear the stories. So Absolutely. I've just learned to tell them. And in that last couple of years, the last 5 years of working with for instance, Jimmy Buffett, talk about the person who could tell a story in a song or just tell a story. He was really good at it. And of course, his brand got so big and massive that he was playing arenas for the last 30 years of his life, or stadiums or giant places. Got less and less intimate. But still, writing with that guy, I'll tell you this, in Christmas 22, he called me up and said he would always, in the later years of his life, he would call me and say, are you ready for some homework? And that meant I want to write a record. Mm-hmm. And it would almost always be like a month before the record was going to be begun recording. Mm-hmm. But that's the way he worked. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to write, he didn't write all the time. So I'm going to write. And he would enlist people he knew. Mac McAnally, Peter Mayer from the band, and sometimes Scotty Emmerich later, me, a couple other people. And he'd pick a couple of songs to cover maybe. And of course I'd say, yeah, I'm ready to do stuff. And in the last 5 years, he had Merkel cell carcinoma, and I think the first time I wrote with him since he had been diagnosed was Christmas 2019, and the next time was Christmas 22. And of course, Christmas 2019, we made a record in January 2020, and then the year was sort of erased, from touring, etc.
Yeah.
So, but I remember it was in 2019 that I really understood. I'm a slow learner. I'm a very quick learner in other ways. Like I can learn the chords to a song or start playing on a song that I've never heard before and start playing on it. That's why I can do session work, etc. But the whole time I was writing with him up to that point, I was like, what does he want me to be? Does he want me to be something? And I wasn't consciously thinking that. I was just feeling it like on a cellular level. And then in 2019, he said, I can't get together with you. And this is pre-COVID, but he kind of hinted that he had some kind of diagnosis and he had to go do this treatment. And as it turned out, he was almost always getting treated in Houston or Boston. So he's flying around in a private plane getting these treatments. And then it was 2020, And then he still had Merkel cell carcinoma. And then, he died in 23. But it just hit me one day because I'm not a slow learner in ways like that, maybe self-confidence or self-knowledge, or maybe the knowledge of how somebody else sees you. But it hit me in 2019. It was like, he just wants me to help him write songs. He doesn't want me to be him. And I had not ever tried to be him in any way. But it was just fascinating to sort of have this breakthrough right there at the end, of course.
Yeah.
And but when so in both of those times, I was completely comfortable with writing remotely from each other. So the last 10 songs we worked on together, we weren't even in the same room until we were in the studio. And
just like on Zoom, or just more than
really like
emails,
calls, texts, emails. He was he was a person who would dive right into a Pro Tools session at home, and so it was really just back and forth. But it was because that was the way he had to do it because of his medical situation. That's what he said. So I just said, sure. What am I going to do? Say no? I have to get in the room or I'm not writing. And so those songs were all, I started them all because he's also running sort of this business empire.
Yeah.
But he's also a person who still listens to records and still, a lot of people really kind of gloss over when you mention that guy. If they don't know him from like the 70s, then they're like, oh, he was that guy that had the people that dressed up like parrots at his concerts, annoying fans or whatever, Yeah. And, but, on those records that I worked on, which were like 7 or 8 records over 20 years, I got to play on records with Mark Knopfler and that band Gomez from England. Remember Gomez, like Britpop band? Tomani Diabate, who was like Ali Farcatore's partner.
Amazing.
Sonny Landreth. Ralph McDonald was in the band at first. And Ralph, it's just folks Google Ralph McDonald and see his career, and what songs that he wrote and records he played on. And just being around folks like that. A Billy Payne from Little Feat, on and on and on. It's just sort of like, just to get those opportunities, because for one thing, it just makes them, they're still superhuman because they're so great. Or Bill Withers, I got to play on one of the last songs Bill Withers ever sang on, and that's just massive for me,
Yeah.
And not that at the same time going over to Seattle and going to Olympic Peninsula to this little funky old mossy church camp in the Doug Firs, is just as thrilling,
Absolutely.
So,
thank you so much for your time sharing these
thank
stories.
you.
It's fantastic to get to talk with you a little bit more
awesome.
deeply. And congratulations again on the Grammy.
Thank you.
And
Nomination.
Yeah, shoe in. And man, all the best for this year and beyond.
You too.
Thanks, Will.
The Morse Code Podcast is produced by Korby Linker and Jared Hammond in East Nashville, Tennessee. Our executive producer is Randa Newman. You can find full videos for this and all previous episodes at morsecodepodcast.com.